Hey there, and thank you for joining me in the Hygge Lifestyle Cowl sponsored by Red Heart. Together, you and I will be working on this afghan over the next 2 weeks, and I can't wait to get started. Let's first have a look at the supplies. To complete this cowl, you'll need 6 skeins of 3 different colors. Here I'm using Almond, Slate Blue, and Snow. You'll also need a size 6.5mm crochet hook. The last thing you'll need is to visit BHookedCrochet.com/Hygge, that's Hygge, for the written instructions. All right, now let's get started. So to get started, we'll create our slip knot and then chain 5. Then we need to find the third chain from the hook. So I've got 1, 2, and 3. I like to flip it over because I want to work my stitch here in the back bump of the chain, and I'll double crochet into that third chain. Now this leaves us with 2 chains over here on this side, and we are counting that as a double crochet for this stitch. Normally it's traditional to count 2 chains as a half double crochet, but I find the edges are a little cleaner if we use just 2, so keep that in mind. Then we have 2 chains remaining, so in that next one we want to work 3 double crochets. But after you get to that second one, we're going to place a marker there. So I've got 1 double crochet in that chain. I'll work into the same place for the second one. But before I go on to the next one, I'll use one of my locking stitch markers and place it on that last stitch that I made. And that's because this is my increase point. This is just a visual cue, so I don't have to count stitches. And with that, we need to make 1 more double crochet into that same chain. And then in our final chain, we'll make 2 double crochets. Now moving on to row number 2, we're going to chain 2, and again this counts as a double crochet. Turn your work, and in the same place where that chain 2 is coming from, this stitch right here, we're going to double crochet. So we're adding a double crochet to the same place as our chain 2 because we're increasing here. Then we're going to do that once more. So we'll have 3 stitches at the very beginning of this row, again counting that chain 2 as a stitch. So from here, the repeat is to make 1 double crochet until you reach your stitch marker. So since we're right here at the beginning, we just have 2 stitches to work. And then every time you reach this marked stitch, we can go ahead and remove the marker for a moment, and we'll make 3 double crochets in that same stitch, and we want to place our stitch marker once again in that middle stitch. Now from here, the repeat is make 1 double crochet into every stitch until you get to the last one. Now keep in mind that our last stitch here is a chain 2, and we just have 2 double crochets to get to it since we're on row 2. Now when you find your chain 2, we're going to work 3 double crochets into that chain. And then our work should look something like this at the end of row 2. It should start to take the shape of a triangle. All right, so we're moving on now to row number 3 and our repeat for this increased section of our panel. What we need to do is the same as row number 2, but we'll go through it one more time here. So chain 2 and turn your work. find your first stitch. We're going to double crochet 2 times into that first stitch. So we're increasing by 2, and we're doing this to get that shape so it's nice and flat here on the bottom. And then we'll work 1 double crochet into every stitch until we get to our marked stitch. Then once again, when we get to our marked stitch, we'll drop that marker, make 3 double crochets into that same stitch, and then we'll replace our marker in that middle stitch. Make 1 double crochet into every stitch until you get to the last one. And in that last stitch, that chain 2, we're going to work in that second chain right here. We'll make 3 double crochets. So what we want to do from here until row number 9 is to continue increasing by repeating row number 2. So we've gone through 3, we want to work through row 9 just by repeating row number 2. Again, you can find all of this information in the written instructions over on my website. Right now, I want to demonstrate how to do a color change because we will be doing several of those throughout the project. So right now I've finished up my last stitch of this row, but whenever I do a color transition, I don't want to fully work that last stitch. Let me show you. I'm just pulling out that last stitch to demonstrate where you should stop. So I know I need a 3rd double crochet. I'll work it through, so yarn over, pull through 2. You want to leave it here anytime you're doing a color transition. So we can drop that for a moment. We'll grab our next color, and then we can create a slip knot with this new color and leave yourself a tail that you can weave in or work over. We'll place that loop on our hook, pull tight, and then pull it through the 2 loops that were on your hook. And we can go ahead and trim a tail from our first color. And what I like to do until I have a few stitches worked is go ahead and just tie a loose knot in this. That way it keeps everything together and we can move on with our row. So again, we're repeating row number 2 until we get to row number 9. So just to demonstrate here in the new color, we'll chain 2, we'll turn our work, and then we'll work 2 double crochets in this first stitch. Now if you want to work over these 2 tails, I recommend sort of pulling them to the back and holding them so that they're situated on top of your stitches. So then when I work my hook into the stitch, I've also got the 2 tails on top of my hook, and I'll just work my stitch as normal. And I want to do that again because again I'm increasing here. Then once you've worked over those tails and you just have a little bit left, we really don't have to do anything else with them. I just sort of drop them in the back and I'll trim them off later as I continue with my repeat. So what I'd like for you to do at this point is finish crocheting through row number 9, and then we'll talk about the next stitch repeat. So we're increasing through row 9. We'll do something a little bit different after that, and that's what we'll have a look at next. So after you've worked through row number 9, this is what your work begins to look like. So right now we've increased as far as we want to, and we want to transition now so it's a panel or more of a rectangle. So instead of increasing and going out this way, it's going to now shift and start going upward. We're going to have some straight edges, and we'll incorporate a new stitch to make that happen. So we're starting on row number 10. This row will be your repeat throughout the remainder of the side panels here. We're going to chain 2, turn our work. And this chain 2 does not count as a stitch from this moment on. We're going to make a decrease here, or a double crochet 2 together. So we'll wrap the yarn, insert your hook into that first stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, then yarn over, pull through 2. Then we'll do that once more. Wrap the yarn, insert your hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, then we'll yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. So we've made a decrease there, and we'll start to see that shift to a straight edge now. And that's really the only thing that we're doing differently here on the sides. We're going to decrease at the very beginning and at the very end. So for now, we're going to make 1 double crochet into every stitch until we get to our marker. Then, just like before, when we get to our marked stitch, we'll just remove that, make 3 double crochets into this same stitch, and we'll mark that middle stitch once again. So even though we're not increasing at the beginning and the end of every row after this point, we still want to increase right here in this particular stitch, because that's what gives us that sort of peak, or like the chevron pattern that we have going on. Now from here, we'll make 1 double crochet into every stitch until we get to the last 2 stitches. You don't want to work anything in those last 2 just yet. Okay, so when you get to the end of your row, keep in mind that on just this row, row number 10, your last stitch will be that chain 2. So I've got a stitch here and I've got my chain 2, and I want to work a double crochet 2 together just like before in these last 2 stitches. So just keep in mind that as you're working through rows 11 and so on after that, your last 2 stitches are going to look different than what we just saw, because we had a chain 2 for our last stitch only because we were coming off of our increased section, but you'll have a double crochet 2 together as your last stitch from here on out. So when you're looking at it from the side, we have our last stitch right here and the second to last stitch. So this is where you'll do your double crochet 2 together, and then looking at it from the top here, you'll see the last 2 stitches here, and this is the chain 2 that we are no longer counting as a stitch in this section. So what I'll need you to do at this point is go ahead and work up the full length of your panel by repeating what you saw in row number 10. You'll want to follow along with the color transitions as you see them given in the written instructions. And the next thing we'll have a look at is how to straighten out this peak so that we have a rectangle instead of a point at one end of our blanket. So we're going to start with the right side facing up, and we'll fasten on over here in this corner. We're going to use the same color that we started this panel with. Of course, you can find that in the written instructions as well. So I'm finding my double crochet 2 together. I'll insert my hook into that stitch, fasten on the new color. I'm going to chain 2 and then double crochet 2 together. So again, that chain 2 does not count as part of our stitch. So I'll work it right there and in the next stitch. Then I'm going to make 1 half double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches. Once we do this, you'll get the idea of how this is going to come together. All right, so once you have your 3 double crochets, find your next stitch, and we're going to slip stitch there. And then fasten off. Now we're going to work this in a series of rows, building upon each other. We're going to add a few more double crochets in this section as we go, and we're going to keep building until we get to the top point here. All right, so we're ready to fasten on again for row number 2 of this edge section. We're going to keep our work in the same position, so I'm not flipping it. I'm keeping this right side up. I'll fasten on in that same place, so in that double crochet 2 together, I'll chain 2. We're starting it exactly the same as before. Then I'll make 1 double crochet into each double crochet, so I've just have the 2 here. And this number will increase as we go along. Then we'll find the stitch with our slip stitch. Now rather than work your double crochet into the slip stitch, so right there, we're going to stick our hook into the stitch from that previous row, so exactly where we made the slip stitch, and that's where we'll work the double crochet. Then we're going to make 1 double crochet into each of the next 4 stitches, and then slip stitch in the next double crochet and fasten off. So we've added on a little bit more. Now you're starting to get the hang of the repeat. We'll go through 1 more row. You can find all of this though in the written instructions on how to complete this edge section. Basically the only difference that you'll experience is the number of double crochets that we're adding on. I'll join without turning my work, so I'm still looking at the right side. Chain 2 and work my double crochet 2 together. And then when you reach that slipped stitch, just remember that rather than working it into this new color, for me the blue color here, I'm working it into the stitch from that previous row, a double crochet. Then I'll make 1 double crochet into each of the next 4 and slip stitch into the next. So now that you've got the hang of the technique, go ahead and refer to the written instructions and complete this little section. We have a total of 6 rows. We've already worked through 3, so you'll work through 3 more with the techniques that you've seen here. Now when you're on your final section, I'm just adding my last 3 double crochets here. And the last thing we want to do is make a slip stitch in our marked stitch. Now all we need to do is turn our work, then so we're looking at the wrong side, we'll repeat the exact same thing to straighten up this edge. So the next thing we're going to do is work a border around all of our panels. I'm fastening on here with color B. At any point, we're going to fasten on and chain 2. That's going to count as a double crochet. And then we're going to make 2 double crochet around the side of every single row. Let me show you what that looks like. So I'm looking here at my next row. This happens to be where I have a chain 2 with my double crochet 2 together. I am working my double crochets around that chain 2. So again, you'll make 2 for every single row. And then because we were flipping this, when we work up to the next row, it's just a double crochet 2 together because this is the back side, or this was the end of the row. So I'll find just the first leg of that and I'll work 2 double crochets around that one as well. Now we'll repeat this all the way up the long side, and when we get to the corner, what we want to do is work 3 double crochets around the corner. We'll work 1 double crochet for every stitch. Now when you get to your bottom edge, things are going to be a little different. It'll be just like working on those long sides because of the way this pattern came together. So you'll continue that trend where you just put 2 double crochets for every single row. Once we make it all the way back around to where we fastened on, then we'll simply join with the slip stitch to our second chain. We'll work that for all 3 panels, and the last thing we'll have to do is join them together. When you're ready to join your panels together, you'll lay the 2 panels together so that the wrong sides are facing in, and then we can fasten on in any of those corner stitches. Still working with color B here, which matches our border. I'll chain 1, but that is not going to count as a stitch, and then I'll make a slip stitch into the next stitch. So working my hook under both of the next stitches from each panel and slip stitch. And just work it one at a time. So I got my hook into that stitch of that panel and the next one and slip stitch. We'll work this border so that we can join all 3 panels together. You can refer to the written instructions so you can see how those come together. And once you do that, your blanket is complete.